Good day to you, or should I say good morning to you, early morning from Laguna Beach in California, where the beach is actually quite open. Yeah, not too many people around on this beach in Southern California. A beach which presumably was used by previous civilizations for things like seeking shelter from really bad storms, like in that cave over there, which we're going to head towards. Today, of course, the beach is a place mostly for leisure, for human beings to come down to get away, to take in the sun, to go for a swim, to relax, to some extent to reflect, to turn inwards, think about things, because the beach requires you to do things like put the cell phone down, like when you want to go for a swim, right? You can't take the cell phone. Or walking along the beach even with that thing bouncing around in a swimming suit pocket is not that comfortable. So the beach as a culture starts to force you to behave in ways which then affect the way that you communicate. And that's the way I'm starting today's class, which is focused on the chapter that's all about identity and subgroups. It's all about identity and subgroups. These are groups that exist within the larger culture, but they are at the group level because they are smaller, more tight-knit, and they rely on symbols, specifically the argot. The argot, which the book talks about, the argot being that phrase or word which identifies a group and which a group identifies with. It's a phrase or a word. I can tell you, for example, that anybody who plays on sports will at some point use the phrase, just do it. It's also an advertising slogan from Nike, just do it. So it's a phrase that identifies an organization, a particular team for a particular sport, but also by which people use out loud to identify with each other. It's an argot. We have other ways of using that terminology too. We call it an argot. We call it jargon sometimes. Jargon is a word you may be familiar with. We also use the term colloquialisms. That's a more academic word. I don't know if you've heard of that word. A colloquialism is a local word. Like if you are living in East Stroudsburg and you're attending ESU, you know what the quad is. It's a colloquialism. But if you're not living at ESU, if you're living in Saylorsburg and never been there, you don't know what it is maybe. So it's a kind of way of identifying a group and allowing a group to identify with each other. So the next thing that we want to move on to in exploring identity in subgroups is the idea of how these subgroups are further identified by the things that we do in our regular cultural patterns and ultimately the way that we communicate. So we have identified already what an argot is, but let's develop that a little bit further by talking about how each group that you belong to has a specialized language. That language is organic, it is changing all the time, but just think about when you go out on a Friday night and words that are said between you and some special friends that then get repeated the next day as jokes. You start to repeat jokes just because the words that were said were really out of place or awkward or strange or funny or on the mark or whatever. They become a signature for that night, and then it gets built into the way that you identify each other. Maybe even nicknames come out of that night where you call each other nicknames based on something that they did. So this is a way that language becomes specialized in particular groups. And you can imagine how that takes place in people who are joining together through clubs or organizations, or who live close to each other in neighborhoods, or are participating because their children are meeting each other, or who are getting to know each other because they're traveling on transportation on a regular basis with each other. These are how groups come together, how they identify with each other, and how specialized language helps them to become those groups. And the beautiful thing about the argot in particular is it has an unambiguous meaning to it. And that means that it's clear what you're supposed to do. So at WESS Radio, a subgroup at ESU, we have a phrase, an argot, that is called top of the hour. And that phrase, top of the hour, means one and only thing. And that means you have to comply with a legal requirement to play to air information about the radio station's call letters, about its frequency, and about its location. So ours is WESS Radio, 90.3 FM, East Stroudsburg University, East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. That's our top of the hour. That's our argot. It's something very, very specific. The book also, Fred Yant, also I should say occasionally, I mean he was my colleague for a while out here in California. Fred Yant also brings up, I think, a really great section next when he talks about how media also helped to perpetuate argots. There's a whole set of argots that are coming out of these Marvel films, right? These Marvel films and the Marvel-related films. I just saw the two Deadpools recently for the first time. Hilarious films, I thought. I didn't know they were so funny. I wish I'd seen them earlier, especially the second one. And I just know that from people in the audience, they would utter things. They would say characters from other Marvel movies, and I've seen a few other ones as well, Wolverine, etc. So I do see that people are able to develop a whole new argot, a whole new system of argots specifically from watching Marvel films, and they are a subgroup. They're fans. They're Marvel film fans. Next, Fred Yant decides that he's going to cover several examples of groups and to illustrate how argots are at play in those groups. He does the working class. You can read about that. He doesn't develop it very thoroughly, in my opinion. He basically makes a statement that the working class are found to be underrepresented on the internet. You know, it's probably true, but it's not that developed in the chapter. You can read it and decide what you think. He also talks about British punk, which he sort of extends from the working class because he says that British punk is a kind of working class music. He talks a little bit about how British punk has fashion comments. People started, crazy dressing according to the times, spiked pink hair, studded collars, etc. I lived during this period. I'm still living, but I lived as a teen through this period, and I saw people go through it. And British punk did transform the way that people interacted with each other, and not all of it was good. There's a lot of hardcore drug use, as several members of the Sex Pistols, the leading punk rock icons, as they found out through deaths of overdoses. But British punk had a profound impact on the music culture. I would say it coarsened it. It coarsened the sound of music, and it coarsened the culture of music fans. Fred Yant then goes in to talk about corporate cultures. He talks about corporate cultures are just like people, just like other groups of people. You have your heroes, you have your rituals. Corporations, they have their Monday morning meetings. ESU, we have our rituals. Our department meets every second Tuesday of the month. We just plan on that. It's a ritual, and the way that we sit down and get talking and joke around beforehand, and when we decide we've had enough talk and are going to stand up and leave the room. That's kind of ritualistic in the way that we do it. And all organizations have rituals that they perform, as well as values. Organizations have values. Our department's values are laid out in our department mission statement, which is to provide skills that allow for a sophisticated understanding of communication, in essence, and the ability to use communication. And then also there are myths. There are myths that go on. You as a student going to ESU will no doubt have heard the myth that if a professor is late for class, you have to wait only X amount of minutes before they show up, which is, completely just made up. There is no rule about what a professor's rank is and how long you wait. And the same thing goes with the freshman 15 and the freshman 10. There are myths that make their way into organizations. Then next, Fred Yant decides to do a case study of Southwest Airlines. I'm going to let you read that entirely on your own. I will mention, as a reminder for some of you, that Southwest Airlines just recently had that disaster of a window exploding and a woman being killed because she was sucked violently through that window. And I want you to think about that, because it is something that should be built in when you study how argots and jargon can put the two together. There's a new argot in a way, jargots. How argots and jargon is created as a way to try and manage this public crisis for this company that otherwise has a pretty good reputation. Next, Fred Yant, also being homosexual, openly homosexual, he takes this section of the book to talk about homosexuality worldwide. And he makes some important viewpoints known. One is that the vocabulary itself to discuss homosexuality is challenging. And he specifically talks about how if you use the word sex, it does not necessarily mean that it cannot necessarily mean sex between two people, because certain cultures do not allow that definition for that word. And isn't that an interesting concept, that you're not allowed to define the word the way that you want to, or in a way what it does is it prohibits the behavior, right? At least that's the aim. That would seem what it is. So at any rate, the vocabulary is challenging, and gay is challenging. I'm not quite sure I understand the definition of gay as Fred Yant presents it. For him, it has a lot to do, I think, with an orientation towards life, an attitude towards life. But I still think that the popular definition still is two people who are of the same sex who are intimately, sexually, physically involved. That's my guess. He says that also attitudes vary by region, that's for sure. In inner cities, bigger cities, you have more tolerance towards homosexuality and transgenderism, and the whole scale of sliding scale, bisexuality. We see that in more concentrated, dense areas, and across the world we see regions that are more tolerant versus less tolerant. The less tolerant ones are easier to focus on. That's going to be your Middle Eastern countries. That's going to be your African countries, where homosexuality is actually, there's a paranoia about homosexuality, and it's tied into religious myths and rituals, etc. And it's tied into other sexual deviances according to Western standards, like being able to have sex with a virgin to cure AIDS, which is a mythology that exists in some African regions of Africa. So you do have attitudes varying by region. Then there's the theory that's in play called queer theory, and that's saying that the way that you express your sexuality and your gender, for that matter, is voluntary. That you get to choose that from birth. You get to decide whether you want to be with men, with women. You get to decide whether you want to be with both. You get to decide whether you want to be a man, a woman, whether you want to decide to be neither. It's saying that it's voluntary. Queer theory. Then also you have cultural bases for attitudes. Specifically, more masculine countries, like your Mexicos, like really your Latino countries, they have more machismo, more masculinity in their culture. They're more male cultures. Roles are more specifically defined. So those countries, yes, you have less tolerance towards homosexuality. In Mexico, I see I would not see as many people holding hands who would appear to be homosexual. I always say appear because I never presume to know. But I see a lot less of that than I see going around the United States. But I do see some. And I would say that some is more recently as well. And next up, part of the beach culture there. Early morning jogging, right? When else are you going to jog if you're a jogger down here? If you jog during the day when it's sunny out, as it does get down here late in the afternoon, I understand that's the microclimate here. Around 3 o'clock it gets sunny. Then there's people all over the beach. So the beach culture gets you jogging early in the morning, which I think joggers probably like to do anyhow. So next up, Fred Yant, to get back to his continuing theme of homosexuality, he segues into sexual orientation as a basis for othering. And that's where you're really defining yourself by saying you are or you are not what the other group is. You are or you're not. So are you or are you not a member of the KKK? You're not. I'm pretty sure. Are you or are you not a member of a fan club for country music? Are you or are you not a member do you have a membership at a gym? Are you or are you not a person who likes Donald Trump? Are you or are you not a person who believes that exercise is the key to health? These are things that talk about how we other people and decide whether we're going to belong to those groups. No way would I belong to that group. Oh yeah, I'm totally into that group. That's what othering is all about. Othering often has negative effects. Words used to describe homosexuals. Fred Yant reminds us of dyke and faggot. Those words have a negative ring to them, a negative connotation, and are often said to demean. And the consequences, therefore, of othering are hurt. Fred Yant is making that explicit. That is one thing that he wants to recompense for, if I can use that word, if you know that word. But then he segues into a really interesting dimension of homosexuality and the media, specifically at where advertising takes place. Because in advertising, you have a situation where homosexuals are a desirable, homosexuals are a desirable advertising demographic. As we look at the elderly couple, again, beach culture walking our way. The elderly couple back there, see if I can focus on them, coming our way, taking it slow, enjoying a stroll on the beach, enjoying maybe a retirement down here, that would be my guess, and doing it in the morning when they can have a quiet time down here, right? So the idea of homosexuality in marketing is that homosexuals often, although this is becoming less so, do not have children or do not have young people under their care. And so they therefore have a automatic higher disposable income. That means that they are able to spend more money on goods and services. And that's what advertisers want to hear, right? They want to hear that if they can just get to a group, that group is open to purchasing, a Mercedes-Benz or a Lexus or a hair product or a membership or whatever, a vacation. So that's one thing that really presents. And also homosexuals have a particular taste that is the advertiser's stereotype. Now, whether that's true or not, you can decide in your own experiences, but the stereotype is that homosexual people, more generally than the general population, pay attention to design of interiors, for example, and keeping a house or the interior of wherever's lived that's making a presentation of a certain style with a certain collection of artwork, etc., etc., etc. That's for you to decide. All right, so as we're ending up here with this look on the beautiful Laguna Beach with hardly anybody down here, the question once again is, to bring it back to you, is what are your subgroups? What are the argets that you use in those subgroups? And how does that affect the way that you perceive the culture of that group and the culture of the other subgroups around you? That's it for today. Have a great day.